hasilnya.
Here's the extracted text so you can copy it easily. Part 2. In respect of CFR and CIF deliveries. Section 8. Delivery. 8.1. Subject to the provisions of the agreement, crude oil or product shall be placed by the seller on board the vessel procured by the seller for carriage CIF-CFR from the loading terminal to the agreed discharge terminal. Section 9. Measurement and sampling, independent inspection and certification. Hash 9.1. Measurement and sampling. Nosh 9.1.1. Measurement of the quantities and the taking of samples and analysis thereof for the purposes of determining the compliance of the crude oil or product with the quality and quantity visions of the special provisions shall be carried out in the following manner. A. Where the loading terminal is operated by the seller or the seller's affiliate by the loading terminal's own qualified inspector in accordance with the good standard practice at the loading terminal at the time of shipment, except where the buyer and seller jointly agree to an independent inspector, in which case, by the independent inspector in accordance with good standard practice at the loading terminal, or B, where the loading terminal is not operated by the seller or the seller's affiliate, and if jointly agreed upon by the buyer and seller, by an independent inspector in accordance with the good standard practice at the loading terminal at the time of shipment. All charges of the independent inspector shall be shared equally between the parties, and the inspector's report shall be made available to both parties. The seller shall use reasonable endeavors to enable the independent inspector so appointed to have full access to the facilities at the loading terminal necessary to perform his duties. Or C, should the parties fail to agree upon an independent inspector, or should the loading terminal refuse access as to any independent inspector appointed by the parties, then by the loading terminal's own qualified inspector, or S, in accordance with the good standard practice at the loading terminal at the time of shipment. In the event that the loading terminal does not refuse access, but the parties fail to agree upon the appointment of an independent inspector, if required by the buyer, the seller shall allow the buyer or its appointed representative to witness, but not to undertake, the measurement of quantity and the drawing of any samples and the laboratory analysis of those samples. Full details of the buyer's representative shall be notified in writing to the seller in advance. All charges relating to the buyer's representative shall be solely for the buyer's account and shall be considered solely as a service to the buyer. Notwithstanding the provisions of sections 9.111A to 9.11C, if an independent inspector has already been appointed by the seller or any third party in respect of the crude oil or product prior to the nomination of such cargo by the seller to the buyer pursuant to section 14, or if such inspection has already been carried out, you can now copy and use this text as. Here's the extracted text for you to copy easily. Hash 9.2 Certificates of Quantity and Quality. 9.2.1 Provided always the certificates of quantity and quality, or such other equivalent documents as may be issued at the loading terminal of the crude oil or product comprising. Then both parties shall be bound by the results of such measurement of quantity, sampling, and analysis thereof as carried out by such independent inspector to the extent set out in section 9.2.1 below, provided always that the certificates of quantity and quality, or such other equivalent documents as may be issued at the loading terminal of the crude oil or product comprising the cargo, are issued in accordance with section 9.2.2 below. 9.2 Certificates of Quantity and Quality. Na 9.2.1 Provided always the certificates of quantity and quality, or such other equivalent documents as may be issued at the loading terminal of the crude oil or product comprising the cargo, are issued in accordance with sections 9.1 and 9.2, then they shall, except in cases of manifest error or fraud, be used for invoicing purposes, and the buyer shall be obliged to make payment in full in accordance with section 63, but without prejudice to the rights of either party to make any claim pursuant to section 59. Daj 9.2.2 Any certificate of quantity and quality issued by an independent inspector pursuant to sections 9.11A or 9.11B shall record that the independent inspector did witness or himself undertook the taking of samples, the analysis of such samples, and the measurement of quantity. For the avoidance of doubt, the parties agree that a certificate of quantity and quality, countersigned by an independent inspector confirming these matters, shall be a certificate of quantity and quality for the purposes of section 9.2.1 above. Towards 9.2.3. In the event that the independent inspector did not undertake or did not witness the measurement of quantity, the taking of samples, or the analysis of such samples, then the certificate of quantity and quality issued or countersigned by him must expressly reflect this, and it will not, in these circumstances, be a certificate of quantity and quality for the purposes of section 9.2.1, but merely evidence of those matters undertaken or witnessed by the inspector. 9.3 Place of certification. Where it is not customary practice at the loading terminal at the time of shipment for measurement and sampling pursuant to section 9.1 to take place at the vessel's permanent hose connection immediately prior to loading, then it is a condition of the agreement that the seller shall be obliged to provide the same quantity and quality of the crude oil or product at the vessel's permanent hose connection at the loading terminal as set out in the certificates of quantity and or quality so issued. 9.4 Part cargo lots delivered CFR or CIF, where delivery is made as an unsegregated part cargo lot to the buyer and a third party, the quantity determined in accordance with the foregoing shall be adjusted so that, following completion of discharge of the relevant part cargo lots, the buyer and such third party shall each be allocated a percentage of the total loaded quantity equal to that percentage of the total quantity determined at each discharge terminal in accordance with the provisions of section 18.1 below, which was discharged at its discharge terminal. The costs of such independent inspection shall be shared equally between the parties for their respective discharge terminals, and the inspector's report shall be made available to all parties. Section 10, Risk and Property. Notwithstanding any right of the seller to retain the documents referred to in section 63 until payment, the risk in the crude oil or product delivered under the agreement shall pass to the buyer as the crude oil or product passes the vessel's permanent hose connection at the loading terminal, and property in the crude oil or product shall pass 10.1.1. In the case of delivery as a full cargo lot, or in the case of a part cargo lot where the crude oil or product is separately ascertainable, as the crude oil or product passes the vessel's permanent hose connection at the loading terminal, or 10.1.2. In the case of delivery as a part cargo lot where the crude oil or product is not identifiable and ascertainable on board the vessel separately from the crude oil or product which is destined for receivers other than the buyer, A. As the crude oil or product passes the vessel's permanent hose connection at the discharge terminal, if such part cargo lot is not the last part cargo lot to be discharged, or B, immediately upon completion of discharge of all other crude oil or product if such part cargo lot is the last part cargo lot cargo to be discharged. Schrader point 2. If the vessel has commenced or completed loading prior to being nominated to and accepted by the buyer pursuant to section 14, then notwithstanding any right of the seller to retain the documents referred to in section 63 until payment, the property in the crude oil or product shall pass immediately upon receipt by the seller of the buyer's acceptance of such nomination, or as the crude oil or product passes the vessel's permanent hose connection at the loading terminal, whichever is later, and the risk in the crude oil or product delivered under the agreement shall be deemed to have passed to the buyer as the crude oil or product passes the vessel's permanent hose connection at the loading terminal. Subject to the seller's rights under section 63, and notwithstanding any other provision of the agreement, and without affecting the passing of risk, where the agreement relates to crude oil or product that has already been loaded onto a vessel and provides for the buyer to provide credit support. Such FRIES 10.3.1, property in the crude oil or product shall not pass to the buyer before such credit support has been provided in accordance with the agreement. And 10.3.2, such credit support shall be provided within 2 business days of the conclusion of the agreement and in any event before the crude oil or product is discharged. Section 11, lay days and indicative discharge dates. Where lay days are specified in the special provisions, they shall be the day or range of days in which the seller's nominated vessel must tender, nor at the loading terminal, and loading shall commence and complete as soon as reasonably practicable thereafter, even if this means loading is effected or completed outside the lay days. 111.2. Where lay days are specified in the special provisions, and the seller provides the buyer with a date or range of dates, either expressly or impliedly, indicating the date or range of dates within which the vessel shall arrive at the discharge terminal, the indicative discharge date. This shall be indicative only. The seller shall not assume any responsibility for the delivery of the crude oil or product at the discharge terminal, and, save as regards the calculation of lay time and demurrage as set out in section 16 below, the rights and obligations of the parties shall be the same in all respects as for CFR and CIF deliveries. This should now fully capture the content from the image. Let me know if you need any refinements.